Grüß, willkommen in einem auf Fregens video. Welcome to another exciting video, in this case episode 11 of my organisational series. In this video I'll provide a view of the Italian World War II divisions and how they changed in terms of combat strength, or perceived combat strength. I'll be using the point system from the Corps Commander set of rules to determine combat strength. The point system is based largely on physical attributes of the various weapon systems such as armour thickness, gun penetration rates, weight of fire, speed, special combat features and so on. When looking at divisions during the war, as we progress through the years, many changes are not organisational but related to equipment, better guns, better tanks and so on. I'm using a point system which does discriminate between a 37mm anti-tank gun and a 57mm anti-tank gun, so you'll see these changes reflected in the point system. The equipment mix I'll be using is based on as much evidence as I can obtain, but a bit of it is gut feel. The primary formation I'll focus on is the battalion. Companies will be included when they are support formations or when it's unavoidable. Finally, viewers need to understand that 100 points of tanks will operate very differently from 100 points of infantry. Thus, comparing tank battalions with infantry battalions need to be done through a subjective filter. However, comparing a tank battalion in 1942 with one in 1943 is valid, as is comparing a US tank battalion with an Italian tank battalion or armoured battalion. This shows a simple breakdown of the divisions, regiments and battalions. After the formation name, there are two values. The first is the Corps Commander points value, with the second being the value divided by 250. The points value gives you an idea of the combat capability of the formation, with the second value provided for simplicity. You need to consider or understand that while figure gaming points provides a rough way of ensuring points or force mixes are balanced, they can never be perfect. If one formation is 1,000 points and the other is 1,001 points, it does not mean the latter will win all the conflicts. As a result, it's best to look at the value several orders of magnitude higher. Thus, dividing by 250 gives you a simpler value where it's clear that a value of 2 is inferior to a value of 3. Let's now drill down into the divisions. Italy's first involvement was their invasion of France in May-June 1940. Italy primarily used its mountain and infantry divisions in the invasion of France, although I must admit the armoured divisions or mobile divisions were held in reserve, ready to exploit any breakthrough. This chart shows the Metro or Metropolitan Infantry Division. What we can see from this chart is the Italian formations did not have a high combat effectiveness as compared with the US, for example. I have shown regimental strengths as well. The Italians had a number of different infantry divisions. The auto-transportable division was motorised if trucks could be found from outside the division. This division type probably was not involved in any fighting and was held in reserve to take advantage of any breakthroughs. The auto-transportable division possessed superior infantry and engineers compared with the standard Metropolitan Foot Infantry division. Let's now look at the mountain divisions. The mountain divisions conducted the bulk of the fighting in 1940 against France. As you would expect, the combat capability of the mountain division was low, mainly due to a lack of heavy equipment. After all, this division needed to lug all their equipment over rather rough terrain. The Italians did have dedicated motorised formations, or motorised divisions. The Italians held their motorised formations, such as this motorised division, in reserve, waiting for the breakthrough which never occurred. The motorised division still had reasonably poor artillery support. They did have reasonable motorised infantry battalions on the other hand. These were very reasonable for the period but certainly not outstanding. The fast division or cavalry division was another of the mobile formations available in the Italian army. The fast divisions were a mix of tankettes, cavalry and light motorised infantry. The tankette battalion gave this division some punch. However, the main offensive power in the Italian army was contained in the Italian armoured divisions. While the Italian armour within the armoured division had reasonable punch or offensive capability, I'm guessing the M1139 medium tank was not a particularly effective vehicle for it to be less powerful than the tankette battalion. There was not much difference between the values as a result of the way the rounding occurs. I find this rather interesting. It should be noted that there was a lot more tankettes or L335s in that battalion than there were medium tanks in the medium tank battalions. So this is probably the main reason why the strength was the way you see it here. For the second set of divisional structures, we'll deal with the Italian invasion of Greece. The formations involved in this were similar to those listed in the previous section, and those will not be repeated. This was then followed by the Italian advance into Egypt and the British counterattack. The Italians had a number of different types of infantry divisions in Africa. This is its Libyan division. The Libyan division was a rather weak infantry division, possibly closer to a militia division. It was supposed to be manned by Italian colonists which were living in Libya. The next type of infantry division in Africa was the black shirt divisions. The black shirt divisions were also a rather weak infantry division. Although the infantry regiments were much more reasonable, the lack of motorisation was its major handicap, although it would be adequate in defending a town or fort. The main or primary infantry division in Libya was the auto-transportable infantry divisions, which were motorised infantry divisions which required motor transports held outside the divisional structure to be allocated to it in order to transport all its troops. Some motor divisions or some motor transports were permanently attached, but that was primarily in terms of towing artillery. These semi-motorised infantry divisions were reasonable, if not outstanding. A lot of support was concentrated under divisional command. This would have been distributed to the regiments in real life. The main, or actually only, armoured force in Libya was the Bambini Armoured Brigade. The armour within this armoured brigade gave this formation some punch, but it did lack supporting troops. After the disaster earlier in the year, the Italians could only provide minimal support to the German counterattack. The Italians could, however, provide significantly more support defending against British counterattacks, starting primarily with the British of Operation Brevity and Battle Axe. The final campaign during the period that we'll be covering is Operation Crusader, and the Italians were able to provide significant defensive capability to Rommel when the British launched Operation Crusader. After the disasters that occurred in the previous year, the Italians learnt many lessons, and as a result there were some changes to their semi-motorised divisions. The main one was to increase this organic motor transport. These divisions proved useful in defence, and because they were motorised, they were able to get to where they needed to get to easily and quickly. When we look at the organisational structure of these auto-transportable divisions, the most obvious change is the divisional supporting formations had been distributed to the battalions. The Italians also had learnt that armour, specifically armoured divisions, were required in Libya, and they sent their armoured divisions to Libya as a result. The initial armoured divisions that were sent did not differ from the metropolitan armoured divisions, but at least they were in Libya where they could do some good. The fast divisions, or cavalry divisions, were not sent to Libya, and they remained in Italy. This is a Type 41 fast division. The Italians did create a custom division which they sent to Russia. This will be covered in the next section of the video. The standard metropolitan fast or cavalry divisions are shown here. They were most likely not sent to Libya because they required horses, and horses in North Africa was probably not a good idea. The structure differed very little from the 1940 fast or cavalry division. For the next group of TO&Es, we'll be covering the Italian forces which were sent to Russia in order to support Germany. Although initially a corps was dispatched to Russia, the Italians finally did deploy an entire army. While this was sent later, the Italians did send an army to Russia, but this was for the most part composed of standard infantry divisions, similar to the metro divisions. Only minor changes were made to these divisions. The most obvious was the beefing up of the divisional artillery and divisional support. However, before the army was sent, a motorised corps was sent to Russia, and this consisted of two types of motorised formations, the fast divisions being one, which is shown here. The fast division sent to Russia only experienced some minimal modifications, which included increasing divisional support and increased strength in the Bersaglieri battalions, or motorized motorcycle battalions. In addition to these fast or cavalry divisions, motorized divisions were also initially sent. These divisions were manned by reasonably experienced troops, and the divisions fought extremely well. As with the other divisions sent to Russia, divisional support of the motorised divisions was beefed up and a special CCNN Legion motorised regiment was formed. Due to the way the rounding occurs, the regiment is weaker than the sum of the two battalions. The infantry battalion was a reasonable strength, and it was a very effective formation, particularly in 1941 in Russia. The next group of battles that we'll be covering starts with Rommel's second offensive in 1942. After the defeat at the hand of the British, Rommel, with the Italians, came back very quickly. This was Rommel's second offensive, which occurred between January 42 and April 42. This was then followed up with the Battle of Gazala. The Battle of Gazala was possibly one of the most intense in Libya up to this point in time, and this period ranged from between May 42 and July 42. By this point in the war, the Italians only fielded two types of divisions in Africa, the armoured and this division type, which was motorised, the fully motorised division, unlike the previous auto-transportable division, which did not have organic motorised transport. This division did. The motorised division gained a reasonably powerful armoured car battalion, but was otherwise infantry in trucks. The other type of division was the armoured division. By January of 1942, the Italian armoured divisions were respectable in terms of combat strength. The armoured division experienced significant changes. Divisional support was beefed up. The artillery regiment contained a large anti-aircraft battalion as well as a self-propelled howitzer battalion, which could act as an assault gun battalion. The reconnaissance consisted of armoured corps supported by motorised infantry. The motorised infantry support was beefed up significantly, and the armoured battalions were now equipped with the more reasonable M1441 medium tank. This was a well-balanced armoured division, if weak by the standards of 1942 when you compare it against the Germans or the British. The next stage that we'll cover is the iconic battles of Alamein, starting with the initial combat between August and September 1942. This was then followed by the Second Battle of Alamein, which ranged from October 42 to January 1943. The final campaign was at the other end of the Italian possessions. At the other end of the Italian possessions, the Italians became heavily involved in defending against the Allied forces which had landed in Algeria, and this fighting ranged from November 42 to the end of the year, for at least the initial stage at least. Due to this emergency, that is the Allied landing in North Africa, the Italians sent infantry divisions into Tunisia, where they were able to engage in an effective manner due to the lack of mobility and difficult terrain in Tunisia. The initial infantry divisions sent to Tunisia were basic, with the only unusual aspect being the heavy anti-aircraft battalion being attached at divisional level. While the static divisions were useful in difficult terrain, the bulk of the fighting in this period required mobile divisions, and the motorised division being one of the key elements in the Italian armed forces in Africa which provided this particular service. During this period, there was no basic changes to the motorised divisions. In terms of combat strength, the Italians had pretty much got it right, or were unable to re-equip or improve these formations. The other type of mobile formation that was required was, of course, the armoured division, which was a critical element in the defence of the Axis position at Alamein and in the Axis retreat from Egypt all the way to Tunisia. Apart from the removal of some of the infantry, which does puzzle me, the armoured divisions remained much the same. In 1943, the Italians fought their last battles in Africa, and this raged from January to May 1943. In Tunisia, the infantry divisions were a critical element in the Axis defence. In this difficult terrain, excessive mobility was not required. Compared with the last chart that we showed, there was no changes to the infantry division. After the retreats from Egypt, in Tunisia, the Italian armoured division structure changed dramatically, with the rather effective SM-75/46 self-propelled gun taking the place of the traditional tanks in their armoured battalions. In Tunisia, and in a defensive role, this did make a great deal of sense, and they were highly effective. After the defeat in Egypt, Italy had lost most of its armour, and when it was required to form new armoured divisions, it decided to replace the obsolete medium tank with the SM-75/46 tank destroyer, which had a major impact on the strength of the tank battalion. While tank destroyers are not effective in a mobile offensive, in terms of defence, this was a good choice. Between July and August 1943, the Italians found themselves defending their own countries against the Allies. With the loss of virtually all their modern equipment in Africa, the formations which defended Sicily were ad hoc. Most of the formations in Sicily were garrison and militia-style division. However, some regular infantry divisions were present, shown here. The standard infantry divisions which served in Sicily were very similar to the original infantry division from 1940, except the mortar battalion had been beefed up. The Italians had lost all their armour divisions in Africa, but they did manage to form motorised divisions which had obsolete armour attached to them. The motorised divisions that were based in Sicily had an armoured regiment attached to it, making it a mechanised or even armoured division. The armoured battalions were made up of obsolete tank, including old French light tanks, so they were not very powerful. That ends our breakdown by period, that is in terms of detailed structure. What we'll be doing now is looking at the various divisions and seeing how they changed during the war. The infantry divisions changed very little during the war. The divisional support was increased slightly, the mortar battalions were removed and then returned, and as did occur with the artillery sometimes. A special anti-aircraft battalion was added in Africa, but generally the battalion strengths remained consistent throughout the entire war. Each row represents a period that we've covered earlier. The black shirt divisions only lasted for a short time and were basically weak infantry divisions. The same applied to the Libyan divisions, shown in the middle. The mountain divisions stayed much the same during the entire war, shown at the bottom. The auto-transportable divisions, or semi-motorised divisions, experienced some structural changes, but the component battalions remained much the same until they were merged into the motorised divisions. The only exception was the motorised infantry battalions, which were beefed up after the last org change. The motorised divisions experienced a lot of structural changes during the war, but the main battalion change was a reduction in strength of the motorised infantry battalions. The fast or cavalry divisions also experienced structural changes during the war, but the main battalion level change was the beefing up of the Tankat battalion and the increase in size of the motorcycle battalion when this formation went to Russia. The Armoured Brigade was an ad hoc unit, and its battalions were similar to those in the armoured divisions. At the end of the war was another ad hoc unit, Mobile Group A. This did possess a range of very varied weapons, but was similar in strength to the Armoured Brigade battalions. The Armoured Division was the most powerful offensive division in the Italian army, and it experienced a lot of changes during the war. The last division contained the most effective tank battalions the Italians ever fielded, but otherwise there was minimal changes in the other battalions. I originally expected the Italian army was going to be a fairly easy army to do an analysis, but in the end it ended up being quite complex. The Italians fielded a lot of different divisions, and there was a lot of changes which occurred during this period. This is a follow-on of my US Army analysis, and I'll be continuing this series to do the other major combatants of World War II. And so we come to an end of episode 11 of my video series on organisation, in this case analysing the Italian army in World War II in terms of how their division combat power changed with time. Alle guten Dinge kommen zu einem Ende.